far below the number of slots that are looking for somebody. I guess this year was the year when I really felt going around talking to people in the real, actual world, yeah, okay, it arrived. We knew it was coming demographically, statistically. But this would be pretty broadly expressed. And that would be across from where we're at in Edmonton. I know of a number of churches in our area that are looking for pastors that are in a position where in the next year they could pay somebody full-time. So we're not talking, these are not, we'd like you to come and work for no money and we have unrealistic expectations. These are churches that are ready to support a guy legitimately. And they've got slots prepared, full-time role, and they're looking around and struggling to find somebody. Okay, I know of multiple slots right now that stand open. And then we traveled south, and we've been in, I think, 23 churches this summer, had lots of conversations. And those are on all kinds of different scales. I mean, we went to churches that have just replaced their pastor. Their pastor retired in the last 4 years, and they found a replacement man who took over the role across. So there's a new young pastor, just like freshly minted, just stepped into the role, across to churches that the pastor's going to retire in the next 5 to 10 years, and then of course everything in between. So we've had a lot of those conversations. But absolutely a recurring theme as we have those conversations is that you get in places, and again, they'll be ready with a role that's full-time, well-supported. They're going to cover the guy's medical insurance. They're going to cover his needs. It's a living wage. It's legitimate. And there's just nobody. There's just not a person to put into that slot. Some of these, I'm thinking of churches like big churches with lots of resources. And it's like, that's a perfect slot. Where 20 years ago, the resumes would be piling up on top of each other. I remember when I was in seminary hearing a story of one of these kinds of churches, and they got like 35 resumes or something. Okay, and now the entire market has flipped. It's flipped in the sense that instead of here are a bunch of guys chasing a handful of positions. Here are a handful of positions chasing, here are a handful of guys, and they're standing there in front of just a world of positions and a world of needs. So how do we view that? You can do this. I said demographic studies. So this is Barna. Did a series of these. Just watch what you're seeing there is like the contrast of, what do we say, is that 25 years? So the story of 25 years is that our median age moved from roughly me across to 10 years older than me. And different studies give us different answers there. I mean, there's been a lot. This is 2017, so we're another decade down. I think it's really plausible if you just did the trajectory, which, whatever. Just make a guess. The studies that are coming away more recently are between 55 and 60. Is the median age. Okay, that's rough. 2023 article from Christianity Today suggested that a quarter of pastors plan to retire by 2030. So 25% of the workforce, and that's 5 years from now. Only, according to that Christianity Today article, only 16% of Protestant senior pastors were 40 years old or younger. 16%. Now, I get too that if you get under 30 and maybe even under 35, a lot of churches would be like, we want the guy to be a little older before he's our senior pastor, which, we probably ought to poke at that a little bit, or we ought to stop and think about it. All the same, that's a really low percentage. And the trajectory, that would be the concern. So here is another way of putting this I'll give you a second because it takes a second to digest what you're looking at, like the data. But the basics of it, you're comparing 1992 to 2017. Those are the two wheels. And then the yellow is marking like the oldest group versus the next group would be green, so you move counterclockwise. The next group would be green. Those are the 56 to 64s. And then the 41 to 55s, that's the light blue. And then the dark blue, the 40s and under. And if you're just looking at that, you can see the wheel has absolutely turned, right? In other words, the movement has been, if in 1992, it was like 5%, 1 out of 20 pastors was older than 65. We've moved over to we're pushing a fifth. A fifth of the pastors would be 65 and older. And again, this is 2017. So progress of another 10 years, which is like half of this distance, right? So this is about 25 years, and we've moved forward another, I say 10 years. We've moved forward to get another 8 years. I would only expect that wheel has continued. Here, there's a couple other ways of just representing that. What pastors say about the next generation of church leaders. It's becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors. A lot of young leaders seem to think other kinds of work are more important, that kind of thing. I think we can recognize here there's probably some greater complexity to the data. Part of this is a general demographic trend. So the baby boomer bubble, which would be represented there, that's U.S. population pyramid. Generally, this should be more like a pyramid. And so when you see these kinds of effects going on, particularly that last section up there, the fact that there's more 55s to 59s than there are 50s to 54s, that just represents like a whole group of people that got born around the same time. So some of this is it is a demographic effect. And so you would expect that to be kind of across any industry or any kind of line of work. But something else is up, or something wider is up, bigger than just the demographics. What do you think? How do you process some of this? I could put up an opposite kind of interesting demographic trend, which is that there is an increasingly conservative and religious cohort coming up that skews heavily male. It's kind of interesting. That is very much like the 20s and 30s. There is a bit of a renaissance of religion or religious interest. And that is also broad, studies across from the UK to the US and beyond. So, while this side of it goes pessimistic, like, the pastors aren't showing up, what's wrong with the young guys? There are other trends that are saying, actually, the young guys are skewing with stronger interest in religion. There's stuff happening like that. There's complexities there. We could talk about that and make ourselves all tired. I am very much not a fan of Jeremiad's about the state of the church. Jeremiad's probably not a very helpful word. Jeremiah is the lamenting prophet. And so a Jeremiad would be a word for the idea that we just go, here, what is your answer to this solution? Nothing! All right, well, let's all go jump off a cliff, shall we? I'm absolutely not a fan of that because, lots of different reasons for, it's depressing. It leaves you in a place where there's nothing one can do. It's like your answer is despair. No, I have stronger and better answers than that. It's theologically wrong. Jesus said, I will build my church. It was not a joke. I have to put caveats and recognize you can have, it's true, within a certain place and a certain time, you can have a trend line. This can be true that if there used to be lots of good, solid gospel work in the UK in one part of one century, and then you get down another 50 years, you can see that collapse. And it's still true that Christ is building his church. So it's not a guarantee exactly that we say what is now in terms of people's interest in the church in North America will continue as it is. These things do rise and fall. Right? So there's tensions here. In other words, we ought to feel the urgency. We ought to feel it's a right kind of pressure. Here, we care about God's work around the world, not just our people, our place. But since God has put us here in North America, God has given us a particular responsibility as stewards of this part of the vineyard. Don't let it fail. That's a valid application to drop. And yet what I said, I affirm, there is a courageous kind of optimism. Here's another thing that's just wrong. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do a thing like, well, in the age of the internet, in the age of cell phones, in the age of social media and AI, that's why people have lost interest in church. That's not why. The truth of God and the gospel is deeper than that. It is sufficient to, yes, even the day of social media and cell phones. The gospel is deep. So, here's the core of it. Let's proclaim it. So I'm not a fan of Jeremiads. I'm not a fan of despair. I think we ought to have rightly placed upon us the burden that we ought to be pursuing new conversions and organic growth, not just transfer growth. We ought to feel that burden. And I would put one more, and it's probably equal to this as a burden. To some very significant extent, we have failed to adequately train leaders. And it's got to change. All right, I'll pause on that because that's kind of my thesis for our discussion here. What passages would you gather to make that point? The point that every body of believers, every church, every group ought to intentionally and in a disciplined, structured, focused, intentional way, we ought to be set upon building leaders. It's a mandate. It's not just sort of like a strategic thing, kind of like if you were running a McDonald's and you're like, you know what, I wanted my McDonald's to be more successful, so I'll try to train more managers so that I can have more people who are available on shifts in case one of the guys is sick. Okay, well, that's practical, that's sensible. Of course, any decent business management person would grasp that. We don't try to develop more managers. No, the biblical framework is deeper and thicker than that. It's not just this makes sense, guys, so go for it. There are deep biblical mandates that tell us we must do this. Kind of not quite Great Commission level, but kind of that type of thing. What are you thinking of? Yeah. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Hey, why don't you guys turn there? While you're on your way there, I'm just going to acknowledge this is actually a thick pattern all across Scripture. You've got this pattern with Moses and Joshua. You've got this pattern with Elijah and Elisha. You've got this pattern with Jesus and the disciples. If you watch how Jesus works with the disciples, you see that the disciples fail, sometimes disastrously. The disciples really blow it. That's one of the concerns that comes up sometimes in this whole notion of training leaders or putting people into roles and preparing them and sending them out. We're if we do that, that'll be a risk because that guy might blow it. We'll do that thing. It's okay, Jesus and the disciples fail. Jesus doesn't despair. Another way of saying it, sometimes you can try to invest in a person, and you invest in them for years, and at the end of those years, the person walks off, and you're like, yeah, I did it wrong, I'm giving up on this thing. Okay, Jesus trained 12 disciples, and it's one of the 12 disciples that betrayed him. Right, so sometimes the way that we got off this train was we poured into a guy, and the guy then turns around and stabs us in the back. That literally happened to Jesus. And I would maintain that Jesus did not do things wrong. Fair. So that's not it. I'll give you one more. If you're actually reading, this is striking, if you're actually reading the Great Commission itself, part of the core content of the Great Commission is this statement, go and make disciples. Teach them to observe all that I have commanded you. In other words, the whole emphasis I'm talking about leaders, and I start with the introduction, pastors, so you got pastors, leaders, you kind of hear down that framework, so you can hear this whole thing is like, okay, so this is about getting guys into the ministry. All right, that's one expression of it. As part of a whole big framework, and the whole big framework is, Jesus said, go make disciples, teach them everything I have commanded you. I would maintain if we can be making disciples broadly, out of that naturally will come out people who would take different types of roles. And some of those roles would be in the leadership framework. In other words, my point goes, broadly speaking, we have lots of different reasons biblically to be talking about this. Okay, but I asked you to turn to 2 Timothy 2:2. So let's look down at 2 Timothy 2:2, and the comment is, the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. Okay, and sorry, I'm going to give me a second. I'm going to pull up my notes in a different way so that I can actually get the opportunity to just show you right here as we're doing it. So let's try this. If I'm going to go down it, how many different types of people, if you want to say it that way, if that makes sense, or how many different categories of people do I see right within the passage? So let's try this here. Give me a second. All right. Yes, great. I'm going down it, and I'm seeing here the things that thou hast heard of me. So I'll do like one. This is Paul. Start off with Paul himself, me. And then you heard it. That's two. I should say among many witnesses is almost like I don't know, is that like one prime? I mean, that is kind of giving me the sense of alongside of Paul, there are other people that were also supporting this. So, I think point would be made, if I read the verse and I was like, aha, this is all about Paul. Paul was an influencer. Paul was a disciple maker. Paul had that amazing ability to create others. Actually, this is more like this is a group effort. You could write a book, It Takes a Village. Just kidding, don't. It's been written. But this is other people working together alongside of Paul. This is not, maybe a better way to say this is not Paul the superstar. And he's left the others out. This is very much all of them are involved. Okay, but then what that would go to is 3, you're supposed to commit this. Timothy is supposed to commit that to faithful men. And then those faithful men would be able to teach others also, right? So I would end up with, at the end of it, 4 different layers. And it is just, as you run down it then, I'm supposed to see this happening recursively, happening over and over. If you did, this is a frustrating kind of comparison. If you think like pyramid scheme marketing or something. And so the idea that people always put out in a pyramid scheme marketing would be like, well, look, I can either do just arithmetic or I can do logarithmic. Right? So it's just like, I'll train another person, that other person will train another person, that other person will train. And Paul's idea here seems to be what you're aiming for, what you're praying for is you want to see this multiplicative. You want to see people training multiple people and carrying out. Okay, I would say a couple other characteristics I'd like to highlight. How about just recognize here, you've got this comment, give to faithful men or commit to faithful men, which is to say the core expectation or emphasis is not competence or giftedness or that they have like a vivacious, charismatic personality. It is faithfulness. Now, there probably has to be like a modicum of giftedness. You have the comment in the qualifications. The person needs to be able to teach doctrine, right? So he's able to teach, or King James, apt to teach. There has to be something. But core of it, faithfulness. I'm just going to drop this because it fits right here. And we'll go a little bit further on. But I'm just putting this in front of brothers in the room. Don't walk away from considering yourself in this with the notion, well, I don't know that I'm up to the skill level. Those things can be developed. People can be taught. People can learn skills. I've watched it. Okay, tonight I'll share the picture of a brother, and I watched him do his first sermon, and it was kind of like a classic fell apart sermon. Right? He got lost somewhere in his notes, and it's like, okay, okay, so pages turn, pages flip again. Okay, all right, here. And he starts back up, and it kind of doesn't, like, you're like, huh? And it doesn't really, huh? Okay, and so then we do that for a couple of 5 minutes. He's like, let's pray. Okay. So I watched this, and then I watch a couple of years later, we did a class together on sermon prep, and then we did a class on sermon delivery, and then, I had him practice and record himself doing sermon. It's cute. He'd send me these videos, and he's preaching, and it's him in his basement with his wife, congregation of his wife. And he's preaching away, and then we'd look through the videos, and we'd give suggestions, and hey, maybe make this change, and we'd do it again. And right before I left, I watched him preach before a church of like a Sunday morning service. Main service, and he got up for 45 minutes and preached a solid sermon with confidence and conviction and solid applications, and it was just great. It's like, good sermon. These things, brothers, can be learned. Okay, but Paul's notion here is not that they have to have some astonishing level of giftedness, or, yeah, that's the frustration, isn't it? It's kind of like we expect competency before the person is even gone for it. Like, you just have to have magical competency. Like, no, these things have to be learned. A large part of what defines that faithfulness, like, look in the passage contextually, what would define the faithfulness? What is the faithfulness? This is pretty messy, so I think I'll clear it off. Let's clear the area. I'm focused on this word faithfulness, and I'm trying to figure out what that faithfulness would entail according to the passage. Thoughts? Faithful to do what, or in what sense, or how is it linked to other points within the passage to express the faithfulness? Anybody? Faithful to Christ? Great. I mean, I think you can link that way up here, the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Good. What else do you see? It's just, look for details in it. Great. Great. I could link that to that. The things you heard of me. Paul defining or dictating that faithfulness. Good. What else? Great. Great. No, good. Yeah, links within the passage even that you see. I think I see two that stand out to me that are pretty evident. I mean, just right around the expression itself. I'm thinking of these two. How about faithfulness would go first? I'm drawing it from the commit word. So in other words, if I commit something, I'm like, hey, here, I have an envelope. It contains an excessively large amount of money. Can you hang on to this for me? I'll be back in 5 minutes. I committed something to you of value with an expression of trust, right? Here, hold my money bag. I'll be right back. I committed it to you. That's an expression of trust. And so I think in the context of the passage, the committing is God's words, God's truth. Here is the precious, the most inestimably valuable treasure known to humankind, the truth of God, right? And so you say, hey, can you hang on to this, faithfully and accurately proclaim it, will ya? How long? Till Jesus comes. Okay, so I think faithfulness would be proper stewarding of God's truth. How so? By the verbal proclamation of it, and by faithfully living it. Faithfully proclaim it, faithfully live it. All right, So faithful men would be people who have picked up God's truth, and when you hear them talk about it, you listen to it, you're like, yeah, that's God's truth. And when you watch their lives, you're like, and that also exemplifies God's truth. Those would be faithful men. And the other thing I would say in terms of faithfulness, and this is strong and bites a little, who will be able to teach others also. I think part of it, the faithfulness expressed contextually right within the passage, is the faithfulness to fulfill the charge of handing off that truth to another generation, which again kind of hits us a bit, doesn't it? Because the question goes, are we? And if we're going to see an answer to this quote-unquote crisis, the problem of sufficient pastors, this is going to have to be part of it. Okay, said slightly differently, if you aren't transmitting and if you aren't handing off, if you aren't handing over the baton, you're failing. Because God's truth is worth it. Because God's truth is a precious enough treasure that this is critical. This drives missions, this drives pastoral ministry, this drives evangelism, this drives training the next generation. Because God's truth is valuable enough that I look at it and I don't say, this will stop with me. I've got it, I love it, it's helping me, my family's doing fine, that'll do. God's truth doesn't stop with me. It's bigger than that, it's better than that. It's got to be convictional. Okay, core of it goes, I don't just want to consume God's truth so that my life can be lovely. Because it was God's truth was never about just making my life lovely. That's pretty shallow, pretty empty. God's truth is about transforming human lives for the honor and the testimony of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ died and rose again. That changes everything, and every human being has to know about it. So the truth doesn't stop with me. A drive. I will go, I must go. The truth doesn't stop here. That's the expression of faithfulness. If you aren't transmitting, you're failing. And I would also do one more with, I would just put in one more with 4 generations in view. Like if we're talking about, what you heard of me among many witnesses, you commit it to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Last point I would just make here, with 4 different generations in view, I don't think this process, I know, this process isn't taking a lifetime. The idea here isn't that the time when you start looking around for a replacement is when pastor's ready to retire. This is not a when you need a replacement, then you're like, hey, let's get busy and look for a replacement. This is woven into the fabric of faithful, healthy Christian ministry. All faithful Christian ministry. Missionaries ought to arrive on the field and start evangelizing, thinking, who's going to take over this church ministry? Because my goal is to see this church established and get out of here as soon as I can. My goal is to hand this over and move on. I've heard missionaries say things like, I heard a pastor say in a church we were at a month and a half, 2 months ago or something. He's saying, this guy over here, I'm focusing on him. He could be our next pastor. Now, he's not saved yet, but I'm trying to win him to the Lord. I'm trying to win him to the Lord, and I'm ready to disciple him because I look at him and I see potential. All right? I mean, you're starting from day 1 or day 0 with the burden and the desire that you look at somebody and you say, Jesus Christ died for you. And you would be so much better and God would be glorified if instead of currently walking in lockstep with your father, the devil, if instead you were proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. And that's my vision, my prayer, and my hope for you. And so I'm praying for your salvation towards the end of your being a proclaimer of the testimony of Jesus. I think you would make a great preacher, so you should get saved. Yeah. Hey, I'm not saying you would verbally say that. I've never said it to the person, but I've definitely thought it. So I put that before you. How about that as just a vision and a burden? Okay, and I could keep on elongating out. Acts 14:23 has this comment when they had ordained. They've just basically planted this church in Acts 14. They basically just planted it, and then the comment is, when they ordained elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they had believed. It's like it's like church planting, and then let's go ahead and put people into the spots, and let's move forward. Okay, and you can wrestle with all of this, because I recognize there's the tension as well. You don't want to ordain a novice, and there's carefulness. Okay, all those things. I recognize all those things. All I'm saying is that when we're in the first century, and this is like AD 70, it's not like they planted the church and then they waited around for 10 or 15 years. And we're going to make sure that we'd see demonstrated faithfulness for like a decade and a half, and then we'll consider whether maybe we'll put you into a role. They're pulling guys in, training guys, implementing. It's like this is the mindset. Jesus is coming back soon. Brothers and sisters, let's go. Jesus is coming back soon, and there's urgency. Let's go. Yeah, I just put that before us as a burden this morning. Jesus is coming back soon. Churches are right now, August 10, 2025, churches are right now looking for pastors, and they're sitting there waiting. Okay, and I'm just putting that before you. You got to let that sit with you. How does that go down? There are churches right now that are vacant. And over time, it's just, it's kind of like a clock ticking or whatever. You do that for long enough, the church will fold. It's just what happens. Or they'll settle and they'll drop somebody in there that really maybe shouldn't be in there. Okay, that's happening. Let that sit with you. And carry that urgency. You okay with that? You just got to let it sit with you. So here's what I put before us this morning. One of the patterns that I've just picked up that's striking, and one of the things that I think has to shift. I think for a long time, part of our idea was, well, the ministry training is what happens like in seminaries and schools somewhere. And so we find promising young men, and we're like, aha, that guy. So we send them off, and they're going to do like the ministerial route. I mean, I did this. I'm not being critical, but I am being critical. So if we're going to do the ministerial route, then at 18 years old, they go off to a school somewhere, and then they go the ministerial route, like undergrad and then grad school, and they get at least some kind of master's of something to their name. And then when we see them, when we're looking for a pastor, we call out to one of the schools, and we're like, hey, you got a pastor? And they're like, yeah, shiny new pastor. I got 6 of them waiting in the broom closet. Here you go. And we just plug them in. Okay. And so when you need one, you just call out to the pastor mill that's in, California or Greenville or Watertown or something. And they just pop out. Okay. And here's what happened. Last 10 years, the pastoral mill, you actually go to a lot of those schools, that collapsed. Some of what happened with that is bigger changes in the college education system. That's another conversation. Be interested to talk about it. All these changes in the way people pursue college degrees and those kinds of things. But some of what's going on here is got to be a shift in the way that we think of it. And the shift goes, instead of the colleges create pastors. Who creates pastors? We create pastors. I mean, God does. But churches build pastors in the context of a church. And you know what my an idealistic world would go something like, within the context of a church and within the oversight of a pastor working directly together with a young man or young men or group of young men, there are opportunities to pour into those men. And you know what? Colleges can provide, there's a bunch of stuff, Greek and Hebrew training, church history, biblical theology, systematic theology. There's all these categories. That's a ton of time. That's a ton of work. And a pastor with this pastoral load is not going to be able to just sink a bunch of time and effort into that. Okay, he's already maxed out, overmaxed. He's already run it at 150, 160%. Okay, but if the colleges are able to plug in We have this internet thing, we have this distant thing, or more and more doing modular things. Colleges are able to plug in and help with stuff, great. Okay, but at the core of it, put it right there. There's got to be the mandate that we train faithful men. I'll put in one more challenge here. I said the 18 to 22-year-old pathway thing. I was talking to a college president in Calgary, 3 hours from us. Very different type of school, but I was learning things from him. And he just said, you know what? The main people we're getting that are pursuing ministerial training or they're pursuing that pathway, he said the main people we're getting these days are middle-aged people. So you know, guys set their career, they do their thing, and then 15, 20 years on, they're like, cool, made my money, that was sort of boring. And there's this desire, like sense of, I'd like to do something meaningful, significant. Yeah, mortality's knocking at the door. And part of what's happening is the opportunity, if you want to call it a lateral. This is actually kind of also some of these same guys, Tom Rainer, other people that follow this stuff demographically, are measuring this and recognizing it. A lateral trend, people who kind of already got set up and already did it, and it's like second step. And that might be like parallel with their career. That might be something that ends up over time replacing their career. At least consider it. At least put it in front of your heart, pray about it, recognizing the need, consider it. Part of the thing that gummed us up a little bit, we got locked into the notion of like the formal call with a capital C. Okay, here's a call. Jesus said, go out and make disciples. He said it to all of us. Brothers, you're called. Go make disciples. Sisters, you're called. Go make disciples. Kind of like waiting to find out if you're called or not. There you go. You read about it at the end of any of the four Gospels. You can read about it at the beginning of Acts. Like he put it strategically. He put it strategically so that you can't read any of the Gospels and you can't even read the book of Acts without coming across front and center the call. There you go. You're called. That'll do. Okay. Helpful for me has been a little bit of an analogy. If I was walking along side of a street, I looked over, and we have these little drainage ponds all over Edmonton. I looked over there, and I saw a child in the drainage pond drowning. I don't stand on the sidewalk, stroke my chin, and try to think out whether I'm called to pull the kid out or not. You go pull the kid out or not. Okay, so I just put before you again, there are needs, churches are waiting. And you got to think about, like, okay, look, there are needs, there are churches, and they're waiting. And I'll add to that then, yeah, don't feel competent currently, feel like you need more preparation. You live in a moment in history where the opportunities and the avenues for training are myriad. It can be done in your basement. Okay, there's a need, there's a means, there's an opportunity. And I leave you with that. By God's grace, may he direct us. May he direct us to live out the urgency. May he direct us to live out all of this need in a way that would honor him. Let's pray. Father, thank you this morning for the richness, the beauty, the urgency even of your work.